Part 1. Why SAP feels so complicated, but actually isn't. Let me start with something honest. Almost everyone who opens SAP for the first time feels overwhelmed. Too many fields, too many tabs, too many steps just to do one simple thing. And the first reaction is always the same. Why is SAP so complicated? If you've ever thought that, you're not alone. And more importantly, you're not wrong to feel that way. But here's the key point most people miss. SAP is not complicated by accident. It is complicated on purpose. SAP was never designed to feel easy on day one. It was designed to run real companies, not personal tasks. That difference changes everything. SAP is not a tool. It's a business system. Most software people use today is built around speed and convenience. You click something, you undo it, you fix it later. SAP doesn't work like that. SAP assumes that mistakes are expensive, data must be reliable, processes must be controlled. Because in real companies, mistakes are not just annoying. They cost money, time, and sometimes legal problems. So SAP doesn't ask, is this easy for the user? SAP asks, is this safe for the business? That's why SAP feels strict from the very first screen. Why beginners struggle so much? Most beginners try to learn SAP the wrong way. They try to memorize transaction codes, remember screen layouts, copy steps without understanding why. This works for simple tools. It completely fails in SAP. Because SAP is not about doing things. It's about controlling processes. If you don't understand the process, the screens will never make sense, no matter how much you practice. And this is where frustration starts. People think, I'm bad at SAP. In reality, what's happening is this. They're trying to use SAP like Excel, and SAP refuses to behave that way. SAP was built for scale, not comfort. Think about who uses SAP every day. Not one person, thousands of users. Across sales, logistics, finance, planning, and reporting, all working on the same data. SAP must make sure that sales data matches logistics. Logistics data matches finance. Finance data matches legal reports. That level of consistency doesn't come from flexibility. It comes from rules, and rules always feel uncomfortable at first. But those rules are exactly why SAP is trusted by the biggest companies in the world. The big misunderstanding. Here's the biggest misunderstanding beginners have. They think SAP is complex because it's badly designed. In reality, SAP is complex because business is complex. Taxes are complex. Pricing rules are complex. International trade is complex. Audits are complex. SAP. Part 2. Humans. Think in actions. SAP thinks in documents. Now let's talk about the biggest mindset shift you need to understand SAP. This is the point where many people either finally get it or keep struggling for years. The problem is simple. Humans think in actions. SAP thinks in documents. And those two ways of thinking are completely different. How humans naturally think. In real life, we think like this. I sold a product. I shipped the goods. I sent the invoice. I got paid. These are all actions. We focus on what happened, not how it was recorded. And that's exactly how most beginners approach SAP. They open the system and think, okay, I want to sell something. Where do I click? But SAP doesn't care about what you want to do. SAP cares about what you can prove. How SAP thinks. Instead, SAP does not understand actions. It understands documents. In SAP, nothing really exists until it is written down. You don't sell a product in SAP. You create a sales order document. You don't ship goods. You create a delivery document and post goods issue. You don't get paid. You create a billing document and an accounting document. From SAP's point of view, if there is no document, the action never happened. That might feel slow and unnecessary at first, but there's a very good reason for it. Why SAP is obsessed with documents companies don't just run on actions, they run on records. Think about real business questions. Who sold this product? When exactly was it sold? At what price? With which tax rate? To which customer? Under which contract? These questions cannot be answered with "I remember." They must be answered with documents. SAP is built for audits, legal checks, financial reporting, internal controls, and all of that requires traceability. That's why SAP trusts documents, not people. It doesn't assume users are bad. It assumes users are human, and humans make mistakes. Documents protect the system from those mistakes. Why this feels frustrating at first. For beginners, this document-driven logic feels heavy. You want to move fast. SAP wants you to be precise. You want flexibility. SAP wants consistency. That's why new users often say, "Why do I need so many steps for one simple thing?" The answer is because SAP is not optimizing for speed. It is optimizing for control. Once you understand that, the system stops feeling random. Every document starts to have a purpose. A simple example. Let's say you work in sales. In real life, you might say, "I promised the customer delivery next week." SAP says, "Show me the sales order." Then SAP asks, "Which material? Which quantity? Which price? Which delivery date?" Only after all of this is written down does SAP allow the process to continue. Why? Because that sales order document will later trigger delivery, trigger billing, trigger revenue posting. Everything depends on it. One document feeds the next one. This is where SAP starts to make sense. Once you accept this rule, documents first, actions second, SAP suddenly feels predictable. You stop guessing, you start following the flow. Instead of asking, "Why is SAP blocking me?" you start asking, "Which document is missing or incomplete?" That question alone solves many SAP problems. What comes next? Now that you understand how SAP thinks, the next question is obvious. If everything is document-based, why does one small change affect so many things? That's exactly what we'll talk about next. In Part 3, we'll explain why everything in SAP is so tightly connected, and why that connection is not a weakness, but a strength. Part 3. Why everything is connected in SAP. Now that you understand how SAP thinks in documents, let's talk about another thing that confuses almost everyone. Why is everything in SAP so tightly connected? You change one small thing, and suddenly pricing breaks. Delivery doesn't work, billing is blocked, and you think, how can one tiny change affect so much? The answer is simple and intentional. SAP is built as one continuous chain. SAP is not modular. Like other tools, many modern tools are modular. If something breaks in one place, it usually doesn't affect the rest. SAP is different. SAP is not a set of independent features, it is a single integrated system. Sales is connected to logistics. Logistics is connected to finance. Finance is connected to reporting. And SAP assumes that if something changes in real life, every department must know about it. That's why SAP feels sensitive. Real businesses don't work in silos. In real companies, departments don't work alone. If sales changes a price, finance must know. If logistics delays a delivery, sales must know. If finance blocks a customer, sales cannot continue. SAP reflects this reality. It doesn't allow you to say, that's not my module. Because in business, there is no such thing as not my problem. Everything is connected. One document feeds the next one. Remember what we said before. SAP thinks in documents. Those documents are linked like a chain. A sales order triggers delivery, which triggers goods issue, which enables billing, which creates accounting postings. Each document depends on the previous one. So when something goes wrong at the end of the process, the real cause is often at the beginning. That's why experienced SAP people always say, don't fix the error, fix the source. Why this feels painful for beginners. For beginners, this connectivity feels overwhelming. You expect to fix problems locally. SAP forces you to think globally. You want quick fixes. SAP wants correct design. That's why beginners often feel like SAP is punishing them. In reality, SAP is doing the opposite. It's protecting the system from inconsistency. SAP is designed to prevent chaos. Here's a sentence you should remember. SAP is not designed to make life easy. It is designed to prevent chaos. Imagine a company with thousands of sales orders, multiple warehouses, multiple countries, different tax rules. If everyone could change things freely, the system would collapse. SAP's strict connections make sure that numbers match, documents align, reports are reliable. That's not accidental, that's the core philosophy. The domino effect is a feature, not a bug. When beginners see the domino effect in SAP, they think something is wrong. But in reality, that effect is the system working correctly. SAP is saying, if you change this, you must accept the consequences everywhere else. This forces companies to think before changing, design processes carefully, avoid shortcuts. And that's exactly why SAP is trusted for critical business operations. How this should change the way you learn SAP. Once you understand this, you stop learning SAP in isolated pieces. You stop asking, how do I fix this screen? You start asking, which process am I breaking? That shift alone separates beginners from professionals. What comes next? Now that you understand, documents, connectivity, process chains. There's one big question left. Why is SAP so strict with rules, validations, and controls? That's what we'll cover in the next part. In part 4, we'll talk about why SAP feels unforgiving and why that strictness is actually its biggest strength. Part 4. Why SAP is so strict and why that's a good thing. One of the most common complaints about SAP is this. Why is SAP so strict? Why does it block me all the time? Why can't I just continue? At first, SAP feels unforgiving. One missing field, one wrong setting, and the system stops you. For beginners, this feels frustrating, but there is a reason behind it. And once you understand that reason, SAP starts to feel logical, not hostile. SAP assumes mistakes will happen. SAP is designed with one very important assumption. People will make mistakes, not because they are bad, not because they are careless, but because they are human. In small tools, mistakes are easy to fix. In real companies, mistakes are expensive. A wrong price can mean lost revenue. A wrong tax can mean legal penalties. A wrong quantity can mean inventory chaos. SAP exists to reduce these risks. That's why it doesn't trust users blindly. It asks for confirmations. It checks rules. It validates data. All of that strictness is not there to slow you down. It's there to protect the business. SAP is built for responsibility, not convenience. Most modern software is built around comfort. Undo buttons, quick edits, flexible flows. SAP is built around responsibility. every action in SAP can affect: financial reports, tax declarations, audits, management decisions. That's why SAP asks, are you sure? Is this allowed? Is the data complete? When SAP blocks you, it's usually saying, this action has consequences. Please think again. Why SAP feels unfair to beginners? For someone new to SAP, this strictness feels unfair. You think, I know what I want to do. Why won't SAP let me do it? But SAP doesn't see intentions. It sees data consistency. If something is missing or incorrect, SAP assumes it's safer to stop the process than to let bad data flow through the system. That's a design choice. And it's one of the main reasons SAP dominates enterprise systems. Real companies depend on this strictness. Think about this from a company's point of view. Would you trust a system that allows wrong tax postings, allows billing without delivery, allows stock to go negative without control? Probably not. SAP's strict rules make sure that reports are reliable, audits are defensible, numbers can be trusted. That trust is far more valuable than speed or comfort. Strictness creates stability. Here's something beginners often don't realize. SAP's strictness creates stability. Once processes are correctly designed, users make fewer mistakes, data quality improves. Troubleshooting becomes easier. Experienced SAP users don't fight the system. They work with it. They design processes so that SAP's rules support the business instead of blocking it. That's the difference between struggling with SAP and being confident in SAP. How this changes your learning approach? When you accept SAP's strict nature, you stop asking, why is SAP blocking me? You start asking, what rule is SAP trying to enforce? That question leads you directly to missing master data, incorrect configuration, broken process design. And suddenly, SAP becomes predictable. Not easy, but predictable. What comes next? Now you understand. Why SAP thinks in documents. Why everything is connected. Why SAP is strict. There's only one final piece left. How should you actually approach learning SAP without feeling lost or overwhelmed? That's what we'll cover in the final part. In Part 5, how you should really learn SAP. Now that you understand how SAP thinks, there is one important question left. How should you actually learn SAP without getting overwhelmed? Because most people don't fail at SAP due to lack of intelligence. They fail because they follow the wrong learning approach. The biggest mistake: memorizing screens. The most common mistake beginners make is trying to memorize SAP screens. They try to remember transaction codes, field names, where to click. This might work for a demo. It never works long term. Why? Because SAP screens change. Processes don't. If you learn SAP by memorizing screens, every system, every project, every client will confuse you again. That's why people say, I learned SAP once, but now I forgot everything. They didn't forget SAP. They never understood it in the first place. SAP is about flow, not screens. The right way to learn SAP is to focus on flow. Ask yourself, where does this process start? Which document comes next? What is SAP trying to protect here? Once you understand the flow, sales, logistics, finance, reporting the screens stop being scary. They become just interfaces for the same logic. Experienced SAP users don't memorize transactions. They understand what the system expects. Always ask why, not just how. Here's a simple rule. If you only know how to do something in SAP, you will struggle. If you understand why SAP needs it, you will be confident. Instead of asking, how do I bypass this error? Ask, why does SAP block this? SAP almost always blocks you for a reason. Missing data, broken process, risk to the business. When you learn to think this way, SAP becomes predictable, and predictability removes fear. Learn SAP like a system, not like a skill. SAP is not a single skill you learn once. It's a system you grow into. At first, everything feels slow, everything feels connected, everything feels strict. That's normal. Over time, you start to see patterns. Documents always follow the same logic. Processes repeat across modules. Rules exist to protect data. That's when SAP stops feeling complex and starts feeling structured. You don't need to know everything. Another important mindset shift. You don't need to know everything in SAP. No one does. Even senior consultants specialize. What matters is understanding the core logic, knowing where to look, knowing how to analyze problems. Once you have that foundation, new topics become easier to learn. Final thought. If SAP ever made you feel confused or frustrated, remember this. SAP is not hard because you are bad at it. SAP feels hard because it was built for serious business. Once you stop fighting the system and start understanding its logic, everything changes. SAP becomes structured, predictable, and even enjoyable. If this video helped you understand SAP on a deeper level, make sure to like the video and subscribe to SAP IFI Academy. In the next videos, we'll go deeper into real SAP topics, not just how to click, but how to think in SAP. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.